When Shohei Ohtani walks into a room, everything stops. Every camera turns. Every voice goes quiet. Every person present understands instinctively that whatever is about to happen carries weight and significance far beyond the ordinary. But when Ohtani walked into that press conference room in Tokyo and sat down in front of the microphones, what followed was something that nobody, not the journalists present, not the NPB officials watching, not the millions of baseball fans across Japan and around the world, could have prepared themselves for. In a single press conference, Ohtani declared that he is done with the WBC permanently. Manager Ibata broke down and apologized publicly. Murakami sat in that same room and glared and mocked, and the NPB chairman handed down permanent bans to 4 Samurai Japan players. In the entire history of Japanese baseball, there has never been a single day quite like this one. The announcement that a major press conference would be held in Tokyo involving Shohei Ohtani and key figures from the Samurai Japan program sent immediate shockwaves through the baseball community. Press conferences of this nature, formal, high stakes, involving the biggest name in the sport, do not happen without reason. And the reasons, when they began to emerge in the hours before the event, suggested that what was about to unfold would be unlike anything Japanese baseball had witnessed before. The venue was packed. Journalists from every major sports media organization in Japan had secured their positions well before the scheduled start time. Camera crews lined the back of the room. NPB officials sat in carefully arranged seats along the side. And at the center of it all, at a long table positioned at the front of the room, the key figures in this story took their places one by one. Manager Ibata arrived first. His expression was one that those present described as carrying the visible weight of a man who knows that what is about to happen is necessary, painful, and completely beyond his control. He sat down without making eye contact with the media and stared at the table in front of him with the focused stillness of someone who has spent days preparing for a moment he has been dreading. Murakami arrived next, and from the very first moment he entered the room, his body language told a completely different story. Where Ibata looked subdued and heavy with responsibility, Murakami carried himself with a defiance that was immediately noticeable to everyone present. He took his seat, surveyed the room with an expression that mixed contempt and amusement in equal measure, and settled into a posture that communicated clearly that he was not there to apologize, to reflect, or to accept any judgment that was about to be handed down. And then Shohei Ohtani walked in. The room changed the moment he entered it. The quiet that fell over the assembled media was the kind of quiet that only one person in Japanese baseball is capable of producing simply by being present. Ohtani sat down, adjusted the microphone in front of him, looked directly at the assembled cameras, and waited for the press conference to begin. His expression gave nothing away. But those who know him well enough to read the subtle signals say that what they saw in his face that day was something they had never seen there before. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter and more final than either of those things. Resolution. The press conference had barely begun when Otani made the statement that stopped everything. Without extensive preamble, without building slowly toward his point, he stated clearly and directly that he was declaring his permanent departure from the World Baseball Classic. He said he would not be participating in future editions of the tournament. He said he would not be reconsidering this decision. And then he said the words that have since been repeated across every baseball media platform on the planet. Never mention the WBC to me again. The silence that followed those words lasted several seconds. Several journalists present later described the moment as one where the entire room seemed to collectively process what it had just heard. This was not a frustrated comment made in the heat of the moment. This was not an emotional reaction to a recent disappointment. This was a deliberate, carefully chosen declaration from the most important player in Japanese baseball history, delivered in the most public forum possible, with the full knowledge of what it meant and what it would cost. Otani then elaborated on his decision with a level of directness that left no room for misinterpretation. He said that what had happened within the Samurai Japan program, the internal issues, the conduct of certain individuals, the failure of leadership to address problems before they became public scandals, had damaged something that he had always held deeply sacred. His love for representing Japan on the international stage had been real and genuine. But that love, he said, required an environment worthy of it. and what he had experienced and witnessed had made it impossible for him to continue to offer himself to a program that had failed to maintain the standards he believed Japanese baseball should represent. He spoke about the players who had come before him, the generations of Japanese baseball figures who had worn the Samurai Japan uniform with pride and dignity and had carried the expectations of an entire nation on their shoulders with grace and humility. He said he owed it to those players, and to the fans who had always supported him, to be honest about why he could no longer participate. He said silence would have been easier, but he had never chosen easy over honest, and he was not about to start now. When he finished, the room remained quiet for a moment longer than felt comfortable. And then the questions began. But Otani had said what he came to say, and the answers he gave to the questions that followed were measured and careful in a way that made clear he was not going to be drawn into expanding beyond what he had already decided to share. His declaration stood on its own. It needed no addition. What happened next was something that nobody in that room had fully anticipated, even given everything that had already occurred. Manager Ibata, sitting just a few seats away from Otani, turned toward him. His voice, when he began to speak, was not steady. It carried the unmistakable tremor of a man who is fighting to maintain his composure while saying something that costs him enormously. Ibata apologized, not in the careful, managed, legally advised way that public figures so often apologize, full of qualifications and passive constructions designed to acknowledge wrongdoing without fully accepting responsibility. Ibata's apology was direct, personal, and raw. He looked at Otani as he delivered it, and he did not look away. He said that he had failed, not as a tactician or a strategist, but as a leader. He said that his most fundamental responsibility as manager of Samurai Japan had been to create an environment where every player, and especially a player of Otani's caliber and character, could represent Japan with pride and without the kind of internal dysfunction that had ultimately driven the greatest player in the program's history to make the declaration that had just been heard. He said he had not done that, and he said he was sorry. He also addressed the players who had been affected by the issues within the camp, acknowledging that his failure to act more decisively and more quickly had allowed a situation to develop that should never have been permitted to reach the point it did. He said he took full responsibility for that failure and that he understood completely if the trust that had once existed between him and the players and fans of Samurai Japan could not be restored. The apology lasted several minutes. By the end of it, Ibata's composure had held, but only just. Those present described the atmosphere as one of genuine and uncomfortable emotional weight, the kind that settles over a room when a powerful person publicly accepts the full consequences of their failures without deflection or qualification. And through every single moment of Ibata's apology, Takashi Murakami sat and watched with an expression that those present described as one of the most jarring things they witnessed during an already extraordinary event. While Ibata spoke with visible emotion and genuine remorse, Murakami did not offer the basic courtesy of respectful attention. He glared, and more than once, observers in the room saw what could only be described as a smirk cross his face, a brief, contemptuous expression that communicated his feelings about the proceedings with a clarity that no words could have matched. The contrast between Ibata's posture and Murakami's could not have been more stark or more telling. One man sitting in that room was accepting responsibility. The other was mocking the very concept of it. And with cameras capturing every expression from every angle, Murakami's conduct during Ibata's apology was itself immediately recognized as a significant and damaging moment. When Murakami was given the opportunity to address the media directly, he did not surprise anyone who had been watching his body language throughout the press conference. His remarks were brief, dismissive, and carried the same tone of defiant contempt that his physical demeanor had telegraphed from the moment he entered the room. He did not apologize. He did not acknowledge the seriousness of what had been uncovered or the consequences it had produced. He spoke as though the proceedings were beneath him, an inconvenience to be endured rather than a reckoning to be faced. The reaction to his conduct was immediate and severe. Social media responses across Japan described his behavior as disrespectful, shameful, and completely unworthy of someone who had been given the privilege of representing the national team. Former players who had watched the press conference expressed their disgust openly. And within the room itself, The visible discomfort on the faces of NPB officials as Murakami spoke made clear that his performance in front of those cameras had done him no favors whatsoever. It was against this backdrop, Otani's declaration, Ibata's apology, Murakami's contempt, that the NPB chairman stood to deliver the most consequential announcement of the entire press conference. After a brief and carefully worded statement about the investigation that had been conducted in the weeks leading up to this day, the chairman announced that 4 Samurai Japan players had been permanently banned from participation in any future NPB national team activities. The word permanently carried an enormous amount of weight in that room. These were not suspensions. These were not temporary removals pending review. These were permanent bans, the most severe sanction that the NPB has the authority to impose on players in relation to national team participation. For the 4 players named, the door to ever again wearing the Samurai Japan uniform has been closed forever. The chairman stated that the decision had been reached after exhaustive review of all available evidence, including testimony gathered during the formal hearings that had preceded this press conference. He said the violations committed by the 4 players were of a nature that made any lesser response inadequate and irresponsible. He said NPB had a duty to the millions of fans who support Japanese baseball, to the generations of players who had represented the national team with honor and integrity, and to the future of the program to make clear that conduct of this nature carries consequences that are real, permanent, and absolute. He also addressed Otani directly in his closing remarks, something that surprised many in the room. He thanked Otani for his courage in speaking the truth, acknowledged the pain that his departure from the WBC program represented, and expressed his hope that the actions being taken today would demonstrate to Otani and to everyone who loves Japanese baseball that the institution was capable of holding itself accountable. He said he could not ask Otani to reconsider his decision, but he wanted him to know that his words and his example had made Japanese baseball better, even as they reflected its current failures. As the press conference concluded and the assembled media began processing everything that had just occurred, the immediate consensus was clear. This was a day that would be studied and discussed for as long as Japanese baseball is played. The combination of Otani's permanent WBC departure, Ibata's genuine public apology, Murakami's extraordinary display of contempt, and the NPB chairman's 4 permanent bans had produced a single event of staggering significance. For Samurai Japan, the road forward has never looked more uncertain or more challenging. The program has lost its greatest player's voluntary participation. It has seen its manager publicly accept failure. It has watched one of its most prominent players demonstrate a level of disrespect so complete that it shocked even those who had expected the worst from him. And it has handed down permanent bans that have removed 4 players from the national team picture forever. But there is another way to read what happened in that room in Tokyo. And it is a reading that some of the most thoughtful voices in Japanese baseball have begun to offer in the hours since the press conference ended. What happened today was painful, deeply, genuinely, historically painful, but it was also honest. And in a sporting culture that values integrity and accountability above almost everything else, the willingness of Japanese baseball's leadership to face this moment without flinching, to accept consequences without deflection, and to make decisions that prioritize the long-term health of the program over short-term comfort may ultimately be remembered as the beginning of something better rather than simply the end of something broken. Shohei Ohtani said never mention the WBC to him again. That instruction will be respected. But what he did by walking into that room and saying what needed to be said will never be forgotten. And the Japanese baseball that emerges from this moment, shaped by his example and tested by this crisis, may yet prove worthy of the standard he set. Thank you for watching. This press conference will be talked about for years, and we want to know what you think. Do you believe Otani made the right decision? Should Ibata's apology change how we view his legacy? And what do you think about Murakami's behavior in that room? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay with us as this story continues to develop and every new detail emerges, please subscribe to the channel right now. We will not miss a single moment.